whether you've had debt previously or not, you're out of that hole. So now probably one of the first areas I would recommend is getting some amount of money out of that checking account. So move some of that money over into a high yield savings account and start establishing an emergency savings fund. And the reason why that's so important is because, life has its ups and downs, right? We can't plan for emergencies. We can't decide like when we want our car to break down, or God forbid something happened or someone in our family and we have to take an emergency flight out. So it's important to sock some money away and plan for those emergencies and have some money set aside as an insurance policy.
Welcome to the Military Money Manual podcast, where every episode is all about achieving financial independence in the military faster than before. We believe personal finance shouldn't be boring or intimidating. Building wealth can be simple, and financial freedom is the ultimate financial goal. Now, here's your hosts, Spencer and Jamie.
Hello, welcome to the Military Money Manual podcast. Spencer Reese here from militarymoneymanual.com, joined by my co-host, Jamie. We've got a special episode today, special guest, Darren Thiedick. He's a Master Sergeant stationed at Aviano Air Base in Italy. Why did we invite Darren on the show? Great question, you might ask. Well, I was on CNBC.com and I saw this article, 31-year-old stationed in Italy will retire from the Air Force at age 38. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. So I clicked it. It's an 8-minute video. And there's Darren. He's got his wife, a new baby. They're living in Italy. And he's talking about how he's got $500,000 saved. And you're only 31, 32. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Spencer. I'm 31.
Yeah, 31. And so I'm reading more about it. And then he's got an article on stripes.com. And we put these links in the show notes. Just a fantastic story of, it seems like he's applying all the principles that we talk about here on the Military Money Manual podcast. And we wanted to have him on the show to give an enlisted perspective and to talk about how, the principles of achieving FI, the principles of achieving early retirement apply whether you're enlisted, whether you're officer, and even whether you're a civilian. So Darren, thanks so much for joining us. We're super excited to have you. And why don't you give us a little introduction?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Spencer. So I'm Darren Thiedick. I'm Master Sergeant Aviano. Originally, I'm from Florida in the USA. I've been in the military, just about to hit my 13-year mark later this month. I've been investing for just the same amount of time, right? I was fortunate to be able to learn a little bit about personal finance and investing early on from the age of 16, picked up the right books and got some early exposure. But really, it's been a journey, like the whole, leading up to this point in my life. And I've learned so much along the way. And one thing I've learned is that you're never perfect in your approach, or you don't have to have a perfect portfolio. You just have to start, and you have to get on the journey to attaining financial freedom. And I think that's a goal that we can all strive for.
I could not agree more.
Episode over? Is that it? Just close it?
I think that's it. 5 minutes. We did it, boys. So you mentioned books that you picked up when you were 16. Do you remember what those books were?
I do. So you guys are going to laugh at this one, but it's Stock Investing for Dummies. That's where I started, as basic as it gets, right? I also picked up, I think it was if I remember correctly, the Essays by Warren Buffett. It was some book around Warren Buffett. And so I got to learn about him at an early age. And I was really fortunate just to pick up, like I said, the right books and got off on the right start.
You got lucky there. I didn't laugh at your Stock Investing for Dummies, because one of the first personal finance books I read was from the Laughlin Air Force Base Library, and it was Personal Finance for Dummies. And it's actually a really good book. I can't remember who wrote it. It really lays things out. And I would say that a lot of my success probably came from reading that book. So Darren, you joined the Air Force very young. Was that something that you always wanted to do when you were growing up? Did you have any family history?
I do have family history. So my dad and my granddad were in the Army. They didn't retire, but they were in for a few years. My dad was enlisted originally, and then he got out, did ROTC at Florida State University, and then he came back in and got to be a captain in the Army. Growing up, joining the military wasn't a part of my plan. My dad never really pushed me in that direction. It was probably until I was like halfway through my senior year. When you're doing college applications, you're trying to figure out what you want to do in life when you grow up, right? I really had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I started considering the military at that time. after several conversations with my father, he actually introduced me to some military vets, and they just happened to be Air Force. And so I got a lot of really good stories from them, and just, they kind of spun me up on what the Air Force was like. And my dad was thankfully supportive. I don't think he was going to let me go Army or any other branch. That's kind of where it started.
That's awesome. So as a new airman, you had already opened a Roth IRA before joining the Air Force, or right about the same time, same age, at least at 18. How did you start investing when you started getting the real paychecks? Even though airman pay is not a lot on paper, how did you balance that and start your financial future off on a good foot?
Yeah, so the summer before I joined, I did establish the Roth IRA account. When I started receiving regular paychecks, I couldn't really, at the time, put so much away to max out my account, but I started putting just a little bit at a time. I don't remember the exact amount, but I know it was a few $100s. And as you guys know, when you first starting off, it's a struggle bus, right? But I saved what I could. I realized, and I was hoping at the time, right, just putting a little away would pay its dividends later. And it surely did.
I wanted to get into some tactics and to really dive into your investing strategy and the actual steps that you took to amass this portfolio of over $500,000, $500,000. So I just did some quick math here. You've been in for 13 years. Do you know how much approximately your net worth was coming into the military?
I probably started off with a little bit of savings from previous jobs. Probably had about 1,000. Not a whole lot.
Okay. Yeah, not a whole
negative.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't negative.
Me and Jamie both came in negative six figures. So starting from zero is better than starting from negative 50,000. That's for sure. Okay. So 13 years to save $500,000, right? Now, if I plug that into my little calculator here, that's $38,500 a year, right? If you were making a 0% return. But obviously, you probably haven't made a 0% return over the years. So, and I'm betting that as an enlisted service member, the first year you didn't save $38,000. So I think this is a great example here that just shows that, with time and consistent investing, you can build a huge portfolio that when you're first getting started, I'm sure, actually, let me ask, did you run the numbers or did you figure out the spreadsheet? Did you realize early on in your career that you'd have $500,000 after you'd been in for 13 years?
That's a great question, Spencer. I had no idea. I did not. Back then, I was just trying to save what I could. I had no idea how to even run the numbers, to be fair with you. I did understand the concept of compound interest. I just hadn't seen it for myself yet at that point. And so when I started small, did what I could, put the money aside, and I adopted the pay it yourself first method, right? So I didn't save what I had left over from spending. I took the reverse position from that. I saved what I could first, and then I spent what I had left over. So it wasn't probably until many years in that as I saw my portfolio amassing the amount it did, that's when I started really thinking, okay, I can do this, right? I can do this before I even retire from the military. If that's my decision to stay in the military for 20, I came in with that mindset to do 20. And I really thought I could accomplish this within 20 years. So that's when it became a reality for me. And it started setting in if I just keep on this path and keep setting milestones for myself, I can achieve this.
Did you have a target savings rate initially, or was it literally just put a couple $100s into an investment and then just live on the rest? Was there, because it sounds like there wasn't this big overall strategy. You just got it started and then you figured it out as you went along.
Yeah, no, great question again. So when I first started off, probably the first year in the military, I did not max out my Roth IRA, and that was the only investment account I had at the time. The second year coming in, that's when I started maxing out my Roth. So that was my initial goal to, I think the Roth contribution limits, they've increased over time, right, due to inflation. I want to say it was $5,000 a year back then for a single or for an individual. And so I just started, that was my goal initially, just hitting that mark. And then when I started, fast forward years in, I opened a TSP. I have a taxable brokerage account. That's when I started saving more as I was earning more. When I was running the numbers, a few years in the military on compound interest calculators online, I kind of set up a better defined savings goal at that time.
When you put that money aside, Where did you put it? And how did you decide where to put that money? Was it education, self-education, books, friends? How did you decide what to do and what'd you do?
A lot of it was really through self-education. Starting off, kept reading, personal finance books. Some of the books, like probably towards the middle of my career, that really inspired me was Unshakable by Tony Robbins. It's a really great book. I recommend it to anyone just starting off. It's a easy to read kind of financial freedom playbook. Tony he's a life coach, licensed psychologist, pretty well known around the world, but he consolidates a lot of the information he gets from interviews with people like Jack Bogle, Warren Buffett, put that in the book and kind of translate it for the common person to understand. That was a critical book for me. A couple other books that I read that really kind of inspired me to continue to learn how to invest and focus on not just the technical analysis side, but fundamental analysis and getting and evaluating businesses, because that's when I learned that you've got to look at every stock as a business, right? And look behind the share price and evaluate how businesses work and understand that every business is unique. Every industry is unique. You've got to understand the ins and outs of that if you really want to get into the weeds there.
And did you opt into the BRS, the blended retirement system, when it was offered?
I chose to say legacy at the time. Yeah, I had the option. I kind of knew I wanted to retire from the military, and make a career out of it. The BRS, I think, is, with a lot of people, gets a bad rep. I think it's a great option for a lot of service members, because if you run the numbers and look at how many enlisted members especially retire, I mean, it's around 17%, 18%. So the great majority don't retire. And so I think it benefits most to come away with a little additional money as opposed to not getting anything and having what they've contributed in TSP.
Yeah, I agree. I opted in and I left early from the service before I hit 20 years. And so I got all my matching, and that's been growing in my thrift savings plan ever since. Okay, so Darren, I want to talk specifics. Okay, so we talked about where you're putting this money. So it sounds like you started off with a Roth IRA, and then later you opted in to start contributing to your thrift savings plan, TSP. Now, most airmen and young enlisted and officers who are joining today, actually everyone who's joining today, is going to be in the blended retirement system, and they're going to be automatically contributing 5% of their paycheck to the thrift savings plan. And it's going to be going into a life cycle fund inside the TSP. But inside your Roth IRA. So Jamie and I haven't really talked about investment options too often inside the Roth IRA because we're always talking about the TSP, and that's pretty simple. You get 5 funds, and then you have the life cycle funds, which are just made up of those 5 funds. But what were you holding inside your Roth IRA? What does your portfolio look like today?
Yeah, so I started off buying individual stocks, actually. It wasn't until probably around 2016, 2017 that I started delving into ETFs, or exchange traded funds, which I kind of in more recent years began to round out my portfolio more in ETFs. So when I started off, and really to this day, I've hold a lot of industry leaders, right? So we're talking the big names that everybody knows: Microsoft, Apple, JP Morgan, BlackRock. I've diversified across several industries. So that's kind of was my primary investing strategy throughout my years of investing. And then some of the ETFs I hold to this day, right, and this is what's worked for me, is VOO from Vanguard. So Vanguard's S&P 500 ETF. I have had VTI, which is Vanguard's US Total Stock Market Fund. And then as well as VGT, which is Vanguard's Information Technologies ETF.
Would you be willing to share about how much you have stocks versus bonds and US versus international?
Absolutely. So currently I'm 100% equities. Probably went 100% equities about 4 or 5 years ago. And this was just before COVID.
Good timing, man. No.
Yeah.
Good timing if you held on.
And I did hold on. Yeah. So I was very fortunate. Yeah. I kind of reevaluated my strategy, and I realized that I was probably a little bit more conservative than I'd like to be. Even at that time, I didn't have more than probably 5% of my portfolio in bonds, right? So it was mostly equities, but I'm 100% equities now. And I realized how comfortable I am. And I've endured a couple market drops. And when COVID hit, and in 2022 as well, that's when I kind of realized that, hey, I've developed the stomach for this and the emotional fortitude for this, so I can hang in there. So I have the patience and I've built the discipline, thankfully.
Yeah, there's nothing like March 2020 where I watched just like day after day. It's like, oh, okay, there goes another 100,000. There goes another
Yeah.
50,000. But the whole way down, my wife and I just looked at each other and we're like, it's all just imaginary anyways. So let's just keep buying. Like, this is the best time to buy. And we did. And now COVID was like a blip, like the crash, it recovered within a couple months. You look back at other stock market bear markets like 1999 to 2001, where you had 3 years in a row of negative returns. Now, we haven't had something like that basically since then. 2008, 2007, I think was just 2 years of negative returns. But, as an investor, you do kind of need to go through those trial periods and see, like, do you have the mental fortitude? Do you have the stomach to do this and watch your portfolio drop 30%? Maybe some people in cryptocurrencies are like, haha, 30%, that's nothing. I've watched my portfolio drop 90%, but it's one of those things that you can't really read about or teach. You kind of have to go through it. And I'm actually 100% equities right now as well. Having been through a couple flat markets and a couple down markets over the years, I realized that, yeah, I'm quite comfortable, watching 25, 30, 40% of my portfolio disappear. And because I have faith that it's going to come back as it always has.
So everyone's risk tolerance is going to be different, but you heard 100% equities, 100% equities. I'm like 98% equities. What would you say if you're sitting down with someone at work or at lunch and they're like, I heard this, 100 minus your age, and so I'm at 70% stocks and 30% bonds. Help me understand how you stomach and chose 100% equities. Not that that's right for everyone, but how did you come to that decision or maybe help someone else get there?
Yeah, great question, Jamie. So when I do talk to service members, for me, I realize there's a reason why we call it personal finance, because it is very personal and finances look different for everyone. I think risk tolerance should be one of the first topics, you discuss, and you really have to get an understanding. So every investor, especially when starting off, kind of has to have a face-to-face with themselves and realize how much risk they can tolerate so they can sleep at night, right? I think that's the most important thing. While 100% equities works for me and Spencer, maybe, that's not going to be the case for everyone. And I think you just kind of have to lead with that and understand, like, hey, probably better starting off, right? You don't necessarily have to be 100% equities. I wasn't starting off, right? But I kind of realized that, like Spencer was saying, maybe you go through one or two market corrections, you see how you respond, right? And then you kind of get a better understanding of yourself. But starting off, I would say whatever that person is comfortable with, that's where they need to kind of land. I also say with the S&P 500 or the U.S. total stock market, you're pretty well diversified there. And if, looking at charts historically over time, while past returns aren't indicative of future returns, there's been some great consistency there. If you believe in American business and the economy and that it will continue to produce over time, I think that you're going to be pretty set with investing in American businesses. So for me, I do say 100% domestic. However, I would also say that even with US companies, they're pretty well exposed overseas, right? So whether it be a tech company, a bank, you do have indirect international exposure through American businesses as well.
That's a frequent argument made, when you own US companies, like, I can't remember the exact stat, but it's like something between 40 to 60% of their profits are generated overseas. It's hard to make the argument that, like if you're buying Canadian companies or Australian companies, right? Like most of their business is done in their country. And so there is a home country bias when you're just purchasing Australian shares because you live in Australia. But when you're buying US companies, they're doing a lot of their business overseas. You're exposed to that and you don't have to worry about currency risk and you don't have to worry about any of the political or financial system risk that would come with investing in international stocks. All that being said, though, if you do want to invest in international stocks, and I do have it as part of about, I think 20% at the moment of my portfolio, VXUS, Vanguard Total International Stock Market Fund. So it's basically the entire world, every publicly traded company, except for those traded in the US. Or you could just buy VT, Victor Tango, and that's Vanguard's Total World Stock Market Fund. So that has every publicly traded stock in it, and in one ETF. That's the crazy thing. And I think the expense ratio on that, it's got to be pretty cheap. It's probably like
0.07.
0.07. It's basically giving it away for free. So there's just a couple options for our listeners out there. Do your own research, do your own due diligence, but there are so many good options these days to invest through ETFs, exchange traded funds. You don't have to muck around with, mutual funds only trading once a day kind of thing. You can even buy these things on your silly Gen Z Robinhood apps if you want to. So I think that your example shows is that it's okay to shift your investment strategy too. I also started off trading individual stocks when I was in high school, and I thought I was going to be the next Warren Buffett because, I found this I can't even remember what I was trading, but it was called Scott Trade was the trading platform. I think it was like $7 for a trade. Now trades are free, of course, but this was back when picking up a phone and calling a broker was still a very common occurrence. I know, so old. But
were you calling your broker in high school?
Yeah, in high school. Yeah, I was calling my broker. No, I think I had to get my parents to co-sign my Scott Trade account.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back to the show.
Hey, Spencer, I got a cousin that just graduated from high school and they're about to start basic training in a few months. Any ideas on a gift I should get him?
Yep, sure do, Jamie. The Military Money Manual, A Practical Guide to Financial Freedom, is a concise, easy to read, and practical guide to your military money. It's the book that I wish someone had handed me on my first day in the military. In the book, I explain the exact money tactics and investing strategies that can enable you to achieve financial independence while serving in the U.S. military. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and my website. It's hardcover, paperback, ebook, Kindle, and audiobook. You can get a special discount using promo code podcast on my website, shop.militarymoneymanual.com.
Hey, Darren, you run a pretty good Facebook group. And so one, I wanted to ask if you can tell people how they can find it. And then two, what are some of the common issues and questions that come up in there? Because I'm guessing it's very similar to what the average young airman or young service member soldier or whatever it would be asking as well.
I have a Facebook page and a group. So I post from the page into the group Monday, Wednesday, Friday of every week. It's called Financial Dream to Reality. So you can go on Facebook, search that, pull me right up. A lot of the questions I get revolve around debt reduction. Like, where do I start, right? How do I pay off my debt? And then another common question is, how do I start investing? Like, which brokers do you guys recommend? Which assets do you recommend investing? Things like that. Another one is, where do I park my savings, right? So a lot of service members do have a decent amount of savings to start with. They just want to know, hey, where can I maximize my savings, get into a high yield savings account, things like that. So those are some of the more common questions, but the group, the page, open to any and all finance related questions. And then obviously I'm there to help, but also we have a large group of people that have helped contributed and help others out.
So what do you tell people? Where do I get started? How do I get out of debt? What do you have a 3-step, a couple things you could summarize there?
I always recommend to folks that let's look at your debt right first. So if you've got any debt, do you have high interest debt? What I consider high interest debt is anything 7-8% or higher. And the reason being for that is because if you look at historical U.S. Stock market returns, they've averaged anywhere, if you're accounting for inflation, 7 to 10%. Right. So if you can't at least outpace when it comes to inflation and or if you're losing more money on paying the high interest debt than you would investing, it's probably better ROI for you to focus on the debt first, get that high interest debt out of the way. Then, of course, in conjunction with that, working to establish an emergency savings fund. Great rule of thumb out there in the financial industry is saving 3 to 6 months of your average living expenses. So what that looks like is do a budget for yourself. Everyone should start there. For my wife and I, we do monthly budget meetings at the beginning of every month, kind of do a recap over the previous month of our expenses. We use that time to kind of realign ourselves, right? So if we ever do go over budget, in some areas we do, right? We're human. Some areas we like to splurge in, especially traveling. We kind of use that time to have that conversation and say, okay, maybe we need to recalibrate going into this next month, pull back on some spending in some areas, keep ourselves on track, right? So budgeting is a big thing. Definitely recommend everyone start with a budget. And it can be painful to really get a snapshot of your finances, your expenses, but it's a great place to start. And you'll realize how much you're actually spending on things you probably don't want to be spending your money on. And you don't even realize that where those expenses are going.
Man, budget is such a big word, sometimes a negative word. What does that look like for you now versus where you started? app spreadsheet? Did you start by just tracking for 30, write down everything you spend for 30 days? Because sometimes that's really intimidating for people.
Yeah, absolutely, Jamie. So I made this as simple as I possibly could. So I mentioned earlier that when starting off investing, right, I adopted the pay yourself first mindset mentality. I still do that to this day. I set goals for myself. I've gone from saving specific amounts to focusing on a percentage of my income, right, which is what I do now. So no matter what, I try to meet that metric. And then what I have left over, I have specific amounts for like an emergency savings fund that I want to keep in for my wife and I in a high yield savings account. We keep at least 10 grand in there at all times. Sometimes that goes up to 15, 20. I do have some additional money in CDs right now, trying to take advantage of the higher rates before, the Fed makes a decision, right? One way or another. So with that, I try to keep a comfortable cushion there in the savings. And then with the budgeting, I actually let my wife, she's smart at spreadsheets. She's a lot smarter than I am. She has an accounting background, so I let her run that show, and she kind of breaks down our categories of expenses and savings. So we work together on that.
Darren, let's say that you had an opportunity to talk to a young airman. So some of the things that you've talked about so far have been like looking at the person's debt, talk to them about building a budget. But let's say that they come to you and they're like, "Yep, I don't have any debt. I've got my budget sorted out. Like I'm paying my mobile phone bill. Rent's all taken care of. I'm living in the dorms or whatever." Let's say they've got like 500 or $1,000 a month of extra paycheck, basically, and maybe they're doing 5% into their TS, but they don't have a Roth IRA. They don't have a high yield savings account. They don't have an emergency fund. Let's just say they've got like $10,000 in their checking account and just building up. What would you like to say to that kind of person? Like, okay, they've got their debt taken care of. They got their budget locked in. Now what?
Yeah, Spencer. So I would say the first thing I would say to that person is great job. Like the fact that you don't have any debt puts you ahead of most people, believe it or not. So like we were talking about at the top of the episode, I mean, like starting off, net positive is such a big deal, and you should celebrate that. The kind of the next step to take beyond that is that's when you can really get serious about building your wealth, right? Now that you've whether you've had debt previously or not, you're out of that hole. So now probably one of the first areas I would recommend is getting some amount of money out of that checking account. So hypothetically, right, we're talking 10,000, move some of that money over into a high yield savings account and start establishing an emergency savings fund. And the reason why that's so important is because, life has its ups and downs, right? We can't plan for emergencies. We can't decide like when we want our car to break down, or God forbid something happened or someone in our family and we have to take an emergency flight out. So it's important to sock some money away and plan for those emergencies and have some money set aside as an insurance policy. And then once you get a little bit of money in your emergency savings fund, that's when I would encourage someone to look at investing. So if they have a TSP, if you're under BRS, get the 5% match. That's money on the table. Got to take advantage of that. And then I would encourage them to look at probably contributing more to the TSP, because it is a pretty great deal. Like it's very low cost funds in there. Take advantage of that. If you want to have outside investments, which I do encourage people to do, look at the Roth IRA, especially if they're early on in their career. Very tax advantageous being in the military, because a lot of our money comes in the form of benefits, which aren't taxed, right? Look at the Roth IRA. It's a portable retirement account that is not tied to an employer. So if and when you decide to leave the military, you have the option of rolling over your TSP later, or you can just leave it alone and have additional investments working for you outside. And then one thing that worked for me, being kind of somewhere along the way a few years ago, I found out about FIRE, financial independence, retire early. So that's when I really started to aspire to be retired and be able to focus on exactly what I want to do when I want to do it with the people I want to spend time with. So for me, having a taxable brokerage account kind of allowed me additional options to access my investments, my money early without penalty. So those are kind of the options that I would encourage everyone to look at, and taking a laddered approach to those goals.
You mentioned FIRE, financial independence, retiring early. Maybe we should kind of, talk a little bit about what is FIRE for you? Like if someone came up to you and they're like if someone came up to you and said, well, how much money do I need to retire? What would you tell them?
An early inspiration for me was this couple that retired about the age of 40. I think they had previously worked for the US federal government. Their business name, it's called Our Rich Journey. I think they were featured on Good Morning America, a couple other news outlets, but they have really started following their YouTube channel. They post every week videos covering a lot of these topics, right? Investing, FIRE in general, what that looks like for every individual. So they were an early inspiration for me. And so when I started kind of tuning into them, I realized that a lot of their values and goals kind of aligned with what I have for myself. And so that was an early inspiration. As far as like anyone wanting to kind of get an idea on what if FIRE is a possibility for them, there's a common, you guys know about the 4% rule, right? And then setting your FI goal, financial independence goal or number, common method is to take your annual income, right? And then multiply it by 25, or at least taking the amount of money that you want to be able to spend in retirement, multiply that by 25, and then you get your number. So $1 million is my first goal target. That's not going to be the same for everybody, right? So you kind of have to start with a budget, look at what your average living expenses are, and then account for what you will think your average living expenses would be in retirement. There could be additional expenses in retirement that you've got to plan for. But taking that number, obviously it's better that you're on the side of caution and have more money saved, but that would allow you a portfolio to kind of sustain itself. You can draw about 4% but adjust the numbers if you need to and have a portfolio that will last you the duration of your life.
Yeah, I know for me, the 4% rule was very eye-opening. And so basically where that comes from, the US stock market returns 10% a year on average, like it has for the last 100 years. You take out 3% average inflation, you get 7%. So now you're getting 7% after inflation, so real returns. And then you take out 4% annually, and then you have a 3% buffer in there as well. Or you can have 7% annual stock market returns minus your 4% rule, minus 3% for inflation. And there you go. I know for me, the 4% rule and the 25x your annual expenses was actually really liberating because it kind of set a goal and it set like a finish line that was like, oh, like I don't have to just work for, because it can be for a lot of, I know for me, it was like there was no point in saving and investing because you just have to work for the rest of your life. If there's no finish line, if there's no goal, then okay, yeah, we can save and invest for stuff, but it's never ending, right? It just seemed like you look at my parents' generation and even our own generation, and it just seems like everybody just works until they can collect Social Security at 65 or 62, and then they stop working and they never seem to have enough money. For me, it was very liberating to learn about like there's this 4% rule, and if you can build up 25x your annual expenses, or the other way to think about it too is you can just pick a lifestyle. So let's say $40,000 a year, 25 times 40,000, that's $1 million. Boom. Now you have a goal and you can start saving for it. And some people might be like, that's impossible, or I'll never reach that. Or what if I fall short of it? Well, if you fall short of it and you have $800,000, you're going to be in a lot better position than you were if you had no goal and you never saved and you never invested. So, it's a moot argument that people are like, 30 years from now, $1 million isn't going to be that much. You're like, it's still going to be something. It's going to be better than zero. I'll tell you that much. 30 years from now, if you had the choice between, do you want $1 million or do you want $0? You're probably still going to pick $1 million. I think that there can be a lot of motivation in the FIRE goal. And, especially in the military, if you're serving for 20 years, you've got that pension. So that's basically like your bond portfolio. And I think it's even better than a bond portfolio because as we've seen for the last couple of years, like the value of bonds can go down. Like when the Fed raises interest rates rapidly over a year's period of time, the US bond market is in like a 20% bear market and has been for the last 2 or 3 years. Whereas a military pension, it only goes up. Like it only gets better with time. And so if you serve 20 years and, oh, by the way, you have this $1 million or $2 million portfolio that you can draw $40,000 or $80,000 a year off of, plus your $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 US government pension, you're sitting in a really good position. It really shows the value of the military pension when you know that, okay, if I've got $40,000 coming in from my US military pension, that's $1 million that I don't have to save. I love FIRE. Jamie and I are big fans of the FIRE movement and saving for financial independence. And it just gives you options. So I really like that.
Darren, in the articles that were on MSNBC and Stripes, they mentioned some debt that your wife came into the marriage with. Now she's the budget nerd and the spreadsheet nerd. How did that go, and how is it budgeting as a couple? Any thoughts on that and things you guys have worked through together that you could pass on to the next round of couples listening?
Yeah, Jamie, that's a great question. So my wife, when we met, she had a decent amount of debt. We started that conversation early, right? We started talking about me being the finance nerd I am. Kind of brought it up early. I was like, hey, what's your finances looking like, right? We kind of developed that trust early on, thankfully. And I think at the time, my wife, just like a lot of people, probably felt a little bit of shame from carrying that debt. And that's completely normal, and that's fine. I would let all your listeners know that. One of the things that when we started getting serious about building budgets together and looking at like, hey, we can really do this. We can really eliminate this debt. I think that's my wife fully bought in. And when she started chipping away at it, we saw that number get smaller and smaller. I think that really kind of snowballed her motivation and just got more and more motivated to cut the debt. That was a really big win for her and for us. And I would encourage any couple, especially if you're married or considering marriage and living together, to communicate regularly about finances. That's really important. Finances is a critical point in any relationship. If you look at, a lot of studies have shown that the leading cause of divorce in the United States is because of financial disagreements or because of financial issues. So I think it's important to get, first and foremost, on the same page about your finances and approach it as a unit, as opposed to trying to go at it alone. And that would be my number one piece of advice to any couples out there. Just whatever you do it as a team, and you can definitely go a lot farther that way.
Yeah, it's very wise. I think as a married couple or any relationship, if you work on something together, it can be a source of achievement and success and joy. But if like just one person's working on it and the other one's at counter purposes or is not on board, or one person is feeling attacked, that like they're not contributing enough, or it just becomes a negative, and it's not good for either in the party.
Spencer, yeah, absolutely right. And one thing I like to add on to that is just for especially any couples out there listening, it wasn't easy for us, especially starting off. My wife and I, as human beings, right, we just had different approaches to finances. And one could argue that maybe I was a little more conservative, could be too conservative in certain areas. Maybe she was a little bit more on the spending side. But the most important thing is to just have the patience, work through your disagreements, kind of come to a middle ground. And I think that's the most important thing, is remember why you're in it with this person. That's something that really got us through, is saying, hey, like finances, this is just one aspect of life. We're going to look at it as a problem. We're going to try to create a solution together. We'll get after it. Don't get discouraged if you run into any roadblocks, especially early on when talking about finances. Have the patience. You'll get through it. Through education, especially together, you'll learn about, how to get out of debt, how to save properly, how to start investing. So when you guys learn that, especially together, that just kind of really enhances your relationship.
Just a quick note from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back to the show. Hey, Spencer, I've heard about this free Amex Platinum card for military service members. Where can I go to learn more about this?
Great question, Jamie. I've got the Ultimate Military Credit Cards course at militarymoneymanual.com/UMC3. It's a 100% free email-based course, and I explain exactly how to verify your eligibility for credit card annual fee waivers with the Military Lending Act, or MLA, and the Service Members Civil Relief Act, or SCRA. The Ultimate Military Credit Cards course is a beginner's guide to travel hacking and opening up your first annual fee-waived credit card while you or your spouse serves in the U.S. military. There's no spam, no fluff. The only emails you'll get from me are related to military credit cards. You can unsubscribe at any time, and there's zero cost to you to sign up. You can sign up right now for free at militarymoneymanual.com/UMC3. Again, militarymoneymanual.com/Uniform Mike Charlie 3.
And now back to the show.
You've got a new baby, you've got a wife, you're living in Italy. How do you go about balancing saving and investing for financial independence, but also enjoying life and travel? I mean, I know if I was stationed in Italy, I'd be taking a lot of Ryanair flights all over Europe. I'd be eating gelato every night. How do you make sure that you're still on the path for FI, but you're not just living in the spreadsheet, that you're actually enjoying life?
Yeah, great question, Spencer. I think it's really important you got to find a balance in life. I think, obviously we budget, we try to stick to it as best we can. We have our goals for savings and investments, but beyond that, we try not to stay too tight on the rest of our budget, right? We do have categories within our budget we loosely try to stick to, but the most important thing is to live beyond just the spreadsheet. You got to leave room for life surprises, right? And just kind of be spontaneous, right? I think we're very privileged living overseas, being in such a beautiful country like Italy. We do take advantage of that. We travel often, with our 6-month-old newborn daughter now. We get to take her on our adventures with us. So been a true blessing. And I think you've got to leave room for creativity and be spontaneous. That's important. There's definitely a balance. I think that, I see a lot of people erring on one side or the other. A lot of people do such a great job at saving and investing, but that's their primary focus, and they could be potentially missing out on enjoying life's moments and experiences. And I think that's important to keep at your forefront as well. And on the other side, you can live responsibly and also enjoy life, and you don't have to break the bank to do so.
Has living overseas affected your perspective on personal financing investing at all? I don't think the Italians are really well known for buying index funds.
Yeah, I don't think so either, right? Not that I know of. I think living overseas, obviously I'm in US markets, focused on US markets, right? But just living overseas is I probably spend more money over here to take advantage of the travel opportunities and experiences that I would back in the States. That's probably a factor in our lifestyle. Overseas, being in the military, there's certain benefits I would get, right? Like COLA, for example, kind of allows us to keep up with the differences and, the cost of living. And then we do pretty well in the form of benefits, right? Whether it's OHA, utility allowances. So I think that those are the things that, being a U.S. service member especially, we're really taken care of. And that's another message that I want to send to the listeners is, if you go into MyPay, look under your LES, your personal statement of military compensation. That's something that no one ever told me about. I kind of had to go fishing for and looking at. But look at your PSMC. Look at the figures in there. You'll see that all the benefits that you guys get, whether it be the health benefits, education benefits, things like that. So if you look at your total overall figure, that's going to be significantly higher than just your annual salary. So when you're looking at that, that's essentially, if you're taking advantage of those services and the benefits that the military provides to us, you're really coming out closer to that number. Like I said earlier in the episode, it's very tax advantageous being in the military because a lot of that's not seen or treated as income, right? Just take advantage of that and be aware of that. And if you are getting out of the service, transitioning, when negotiating potential salaries with future employers, use your PSMC total figure, accounting for all your benefits and services, not just your salary, because you should be earning at least that same amount if you're going to transition. And it's not just your salary alone in the military you have to account for.
The taxes, I can tell you from personal experience, when you get out, my effective tax rate, I think when I was in the service, was always under 10%, maybe in the worst year, maybe an effective tax rate of 12% as a high earning 04. But when you get out, you don't have basically half your paycheck is tax free. And it makes a big difference when you have to start paying those higher income tax rates to higher Social Security and Medicare and everything. So it really does make your effective tax rate a lot higher. Even if you're people are always like, oh, I can get out and go make 6 figures doing this or that. And it's but how much are you going to be paying in taxes? So, people don't always take that into consideration. Darren, you've got a great Facebook page, facebook.com/achievefi. And then you've also got your Facebook group, Financial Dream to Reality. I was on there earlier today checking it out. I think you're putting out some great information and people are really relating to your message, which is fantastic. It's just good, wholesome financial advice that I was really excited to see you promoting. But is there anything else that you'd like the listener to know before they go? Any other tips or tricks that have worked for you as on your journey to financial independence?
I would say, as far as tips and tricks, don't fall for get rich quick schemes, right? Realize that To build wealth, true wealth, takes time, and just having the patience and the discipline. Set a goal for yourself, a target goal, right? Target number for yourself. So however much you want to have saved or invested, set that number, work backwards from it, build in milestones to get you from day zero to that goal, and just break up that large goal. Dream big, set that number, and just chip away at it and work towards that. Some of the additional resources I'd like to mention, some great brokers, right? I think one of the more reputable brokers in the industry include Vanguard, who I invest with, and then Charles Schwab and Fidelity. Those are great brokers to start with, great platforms, very reputable, and they have a plethora of information resources on their websites. Some of the great books that you can read are Unshakable by Tony Robbins, as well as The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. That's also a great read. For beginners, or if you're advanced, you've been doing this for a while, I think there's some great takeaways from both books. As far as like in the FIRE area, talked about Artist Journey Couple. They have a YouTube channel that you guys can follow, and they've been a great inspiration to me. Yeah, there's some of the great figures in the investing game have been Warren Buffett, Jack Bogle, who's now passed, but he's the founder of Vanguard and originally created the idea of the whole index fund. So he did a lot for the common investors.
We are also big fans of Jack Bogle. He really has saved the average investor probably billions, if not trillions of dollars already through his index funds. Well, folks, that's Darren Thiedick. He's a Master Sergeant stationed at Aviano Air Base. You can check him out, cnbc.com, on their Make It section. And he was also featured in a stripes.com article. You can find him, and we'll have all the links in the show notes and the show description on Apple or Spotify. $500,000, 13 years enlisted. If he can do it, you probably can do it too. It's not too late to start. It just takes a few simple rules. Spend less than you earn. Invest early and often. Don't go after those get-rich-quick schemes. They don't work. And the only people they're making rich is the person selling it to you. So take what you can learn from Darren. You can check him out on Facebook. Again, it's facebook.com/achievefi, or also his Facebook group is Financial Dream to Reality. You can search for that. Darren, thanks again so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks, Spencer. Thanks, Jamie, for having me. Just want to give a quick shout out to my wife, right, before this all wraps up. I wouldn't be here without her. She came in, tackled her debt, got out of the way, and she's been such a huge inspiration to me ever since we met. So I've been very blessed and fortunate to have her, and I wouldn't be here without her. And I'm just so thankful. And then to everyone out there, just remember that believe in yourself. Believe in yourself. Think about where you want to be in the next 5-10 years, what kind of person you want to be, what kind of life you want to live, and then work backwards from that. Set milestones for yourself. Stay focused on your goals and what it takes to get you there, and you'll be just fine. You'll be just fine.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Military Money Manual podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
The views and opinions presented here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of the DoD or its components. Reference to any commercial products or services does not constitute DoD endorsement of those products or services.